from Washington, D.C.
This is Balance of Power. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We're coming to you now with some breaking news, so thank you for joining us. Kriti, it's great to have you with us in Washington. After an antitrust ruling was handed down saying Google is not required to sell its hugely popular and profitable Chrome browser.
A federal judge ruling just moments ago in the Justice Department's landmark case against the search engine. The ruling allows Google to avoid selling off the search engine after the court found the company had an illegal monopoly in the search market. Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Mike Shepard on the breaking news. Mike, it's great to have you at the desk here. The significance of this ruling today, knowing that some investors wanted to see Google broken up, so it might be worth more.
Well, it can't be understated how significant this ruling is, Joe. Investors have been watching this, but the public has been watching it, too. There has been a broad consensus that maybe tech companies have become too powerful in recent years in particular. And the Biden administration and now the Trump administration have each taken aim at big tech using some of the antitrust tools at the government's disposal at the Federal Trade Commission and at the Justice Department. In this case, have been building and brewing for several years through the Justice Department and FTC during the Biden years. The decision was handed down last year, but we are now getting to the remedy phase. And Google is escaping the worst of it. And that was one of the questions. Would they be forced to sell Chrome? Instead, they are going to be required to share some data about search with rivals, a far less significant penalty than some had feared. Google may not like it, but it's a far better alternative than what was on the table and what the government had been asking for, which is a sale, a spinoff of Chrome.
But still sharing that data with rivals. But, Mike, I have to ask you, does Google have a rival? Isn't that the point?
Well, that is a great way to look at it. And a lot of people out there would wonder, does Google have a rival? Now, when we're thinking about search, no. But this is more than just about search. This is really also about artificial intelligence, because a lot of that data that are at stake and that have been at issue in this case, that through search the company is picking up, it is using to build its own artificial intelligence capabilities, its Gemini offering. But other companies are now rising to the fore, of course. And OpenAI, Meta, we are seeing these major tech companies with their own AI businesses, and they sure would like to get a piece of that data so that they get an opportunity to do what Google is doing in terms of building its own AI platforms.
All right. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard walking us through some of those details of this landmark case. Let's turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York for a look at this and other top stories that dominated the market today. Katie, over to you.
Well, you can absolutely see that Alphabet shares are moving higher after hours after that breaking news, bringing Apple higher as well. But that's night and day versus what we saw in the actual cash trade today. We know that September is a seasonally weak month for the S&P 500, and today was no difference. You saw a day where stocks were down and bonds were no haven. As you can see behind me, yields rising across the curve. A lot of that pain coming at the long end, providing no cushion to a drawdown of about 0.7% when it comes to the S&P 500. There were a lot of different cross currents working their way through the market today. One of them, as I'm sure you folks will discuss on Balance of Power, is President Trump asking the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling on tariffs. You think back to that decision that we got on Friday. The president also saying that the stock market's down because the stock market needs tariffs. They want tariffs. That is one view, of course, of many. But we know that a lot of this focus this week is going to be on the macro picture, and it's going to be on the numbers that we're going to get on Friday, that U.S. jobs report, the dual mandate of the Federal Reserve in conflict. This is the final jobs report before that decision on the 17th. Inflation not yet back to the Fed's 2% target, but at the same time, a lot of concern about the labor market weakening here. And we know that this is going to be a highly politicized figure. There's going to be a lot of focus on the revisions. And then we get that highly politicized Fed decision as well. That is some of the concern working its way through the U.S. stock market right now.
Katie, thank you so much. It's great to have you with us on Balance of Power. Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld with the power moves, and we've got our eyes on shares of Google again after this breaking story. Remarkable, now up $16 or 8% in after-hours trading. Monitoring news from Washington as both the White House and congressional lawmakers stand on alert for a potential government shutdown, and the president making news on everything from Space Force to Chicago. We've got it all covered for you this evening from Washington to Wall Street with White House reporter Lauren Dezenski. Great to have you with us here, Lauren. President spoke for some time in the Oval Office, taking questions from reporters, and the line, "Chicago is next," is something that might be echoing or resonating in the days ahead as we wait to hear exactly when National Guard troops or other federal forces are going to touch down in Chicago. When is this going to happen? Do we know?
We don't know. And Trump himself said, I'm not going to give you a sense of timing. Actually, some late breaking news. Governor Pritzker actually said that he believes that the federal government is essentially staging forces outside of Chicago in order to facilitate this eventual takeover. It's funny, when Trump talks about Chicago, it's very clear that it's top of mind for him. It was obviously a bit of a grab bag discussion that the president had at the White House today with, again, tariffs and Chicago. But he talked about how Pritzker needs to ask for help. He needs to call for him. Obviously, this wasn't really a consideration when we talked about Washington, D.C., but, you know, the law kind of gets in the way here. So, again, when we hear or see or read anything that the president is saying, he's talking about the crime stats in Chicago. But again, he loves to have a sense of ambiguity with timing. He doesn't want to say when he's going to do anything with Russia or Chicago, and that applies here as well.
Well, talk to us about the other piece of what we heard from the White House today. Tariffs very much on his mind.
Yes. It's very clear that he is relying on the Supreme Court to weigh in on these tariffs. Trump himself said that, you know, he sees the stock market is down and he blames it on the uncertainty around the tariffs. He wants some clarity here. Trump has long said tariff is his favorite word in the dictionary. He said that before he was president. And now he wants his tariffs to be fully legal. He wants to make things clear. As a reminder, countries all over the world are looking for clarity on what these tariffs will look like. And this ambiguity from these courts now means that maybe they're not going to be coming to the table with him. We also had Trump himself say that he's not really interested in lowering tariffs on India. So again, We'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, the markets didn't love this move, and it's really interesting because, you know, on the face of things, you would think the markets would like the idea of tariffs going away.
Yeah.
But the fact that we still don't know, and there's going to be another court challenge, maybe this goes to an even higher court, keeps the uncertainty hanging over this market, even as we count down to a potential government shutdown.
Absolutely. And again, Trump and his administration have said that they can do 90 deals in 90 days. It's obviously been far more than 90 days, and we've had far fewer than 90 deals. So to what extent are these international partners working with the Trump administration? So this makes it easier, eventually getting some sort of clarity here will make it easier for people like Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick to get these deals ironed out eventually.
Clarity until there's no clarity. Bloomberg's Lauren Dezenski walking us through all of those headlines coming out of the White House this morning. We thank you so much. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, a brewing crisis, the clock ticking down for lawmakers as they look to avert a government shutdown. Now, with just 14 legislative days to go before the federal government ceases operations as a slew of other legislative priorities, like the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, complicate matters. Now, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries laid a line in the sand earlier today, as did Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Here's what both of them had to say.
I hope, Mr. President, that our Democrat colleagues will resist the calls from within for a shutdown.
We will not support a partisan spending bill put forward by Republicans that hurts everyday Americans.
Bloomberg's Steve Dennis is all over the story, joins us now for more. Steve, just walk us through what we learned here. Where are we on making progress on some sort of deal?
We're not really at the point of deal making. We're basically at shadowboxing stage. We've got still the whole month of September to go before the deadline. Basically, a lot of the pressure is just like it was before on Chuck Schumer. This is one of the very few opportunities where Democrats and their votes are needed to get something done. And, you know, previously Schumer decided to cave. He decided to give his vote to advance the bill that kept the government funded through September. The problem this time around is Democrats have no confidence that Trump is going to abide by that bill and spend the money that Congress authorized. You just had last week the Russ Vought, the budget director, announced that he was going to do a quote-unquote pocket rescission of $5 billion in previously appropriated money from Congress. That number could grow quite a bit between now and September 30th, and that basically poisons the well for getting a deal. So I think we're a long ways off, although both sides are talking about getting to a deal.
Democrats have said right on this program, one more rescissions package. Steve Dennis, I think it was actually Congressman Boyle, the ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee, made that pretty clear. We're not going to do any more rescissions and vote for a deal with Republicans. But isn't there something that Democrats could get, like an extension of Obamacare subsidies, that might bring Chuck Schumer over at the end of this?
I mean, I think there's a lot of expectation that Schumer will just make the same calculus, and if the bill gets out of the House, and that's a big question, because of course the Republicans can only lose a few of their own members. If a bill gets out of the House, can it get out of the Senate? The idea that that Schumer or other Democrats are going to get a huge bonanza like extending those Obamacare subsidies in this next month, I think it's a stretch. Right now, the Republicans feel like they can roll them. And until the Democrats decide to band together and say, we are absolutely not going to take it in the Senate, where they only need 7 Democrats, or maybe a few more if they lose some Senate Republicans, I think it's going to be hard to imagine the Democrats getting a lot of sugar in this package. The question is, can they avoid the vinegar? Can they get some kind of an acknowledgement from the administration they'll actually spend the money and not just hold back the stuff they don't want to spend?
Well, there you have the lay of the land on this fly-in day. Lawmakers are arriving as we speak. That's why Bloomberg's Steve Dennis is on the Hill. And many thanks to have you with us once again, Stephen. Coming up, we're going to talk to one of those lawmakers. We'll have more on a potential immigration crackdown in Chicago that could see National Guard troops deployed there. What the president is now signaling when we convene our political panel coming up. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I would love to have Governor Pritzker call me. I'd gain respect for him and say, we do have a problem, and we'd love you to send in the troops, because you know what? The people, they have to be protected. We're going to do it anyway. We have the right to do it because I have an obligation to protect this country.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington. Thank you for joining us as we consider the president's remarks now and the developments on Capitol Hill. With now 14 legislative days until a potential government shutdown, the president's comments on Chicago there resonating in Washington. And we want to spend some time with Democratic Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois, whose district includes part of Chicago. It's great to see you back, Congressman, on Bloomberg TV and radio. Why not call the president's bluff and invite the National Guard to Chicago to see what happens?
Because there's a tremendous danger in federalizing the response to a crime. I mean, there's a reason we have the Posse Comitatus Act that says that you can't send federal troops in to do domestic law enforcement. Partly because, crime statistics are down. Is there crime in Chicago? Yes, there's crime in every city, but there's vastly more. You have a much higher chance of getting shot and killed in Wyoming than you do in Illinois. This is theater for the president, but the bigger problem is when you bring federal troops in, walking through the streets with loaded weapons, you do not send a signal to the law-abiding population that they should trust people who are armed with these weapons, right? When I go and talk to law enforcement in Chicago, they want to be able to go into communities and get responses and get tips. And what I heard from them when I was back home last month, was they're seeing a collapse in domestic violence reporting because people no longer feel safe reaching out to law enforcement to address issues in their family, which means that they can't do their job. So what Trump is doing makes our streets, makes our communities less safe, not more safe.
Congressman Casten, it's Kriti in Washington. Is there a congressional answer to how to deal with crime across American cities?
Sure. Congress writes the laws. The executive branch executes the laws. If the executive branch was obeying the laws that Congress has passed, we wouldn't have a problem. The question is, what can Congress do if Mike Johnson is not going to do oversight, not going to allow the House to do oversight to hold them accountable? I would also point out that I've now been in Congress for 4 terms, starting my 7th year here right now. The only time that I remember us ever sending federal money to local law enforcement was in the American Recovery Act, when we were particularly concerned about collapsing sales and property tax revenue, hurting the ability of law enforcement. We didn't have a single Republican vote on that bill. We also didn't have any Republican support when we added our Capitol Police officers. So yes, there are things that Congress has done to protect our men and women in law enforcement, to make sure that we bring crime down. But in my experience, we've not been able to do that with support across the aisle, because the idea that we are a country of laws where everybody is treated equally under the law is sadly, when we have a convicted felon in the White House, a very partisan idea.
Well, you mentioned lawmaking, Congressman. I'd be curious to get your sense of what's going to happen as everyone gets back to town. It's fly-in day. As we mentioned, you've got just over a dozen legislative days to help fund the government. And so it looks like regular order is out the window here. When it comes to actually funding government operations, do you have a sense of how this ends? Are we going to shut down, or are we going to be talking about a CR that brings us to the end of the year?
Well, as of now, we've passed only 2 of the 12 appropriations bills, and they were straight partisan party line votes. So it's very hard for me to see us getting to a point between now and September 30th where we pass a robust appropriations package. So it's just going to be about the continuing resolution. And I don't know how that's all going to play out in the next couple of weeks. I think the onus is going to be really on Johnson to say, like, what can we give the Democrats to support here? Because, again, in my 4 terms, I have never seen a Republican-led House not depend on a continuing resolution to fund the government and not be able to do that without Democratic support. And I think what's hard for a lot of my Democratic colleagues is when we fund things that the White House then isn't paying for, isn't obeying the law, and we're not doing oversight, a lot of the currency, the political currency, if you will, of a continuing resolution is a little bit tougher to handle. And it's unfortunate because there are real needs that the American people have. There are real concerns about the impacts of these tariffs, about the declining job numbers that made Trump so unhappy that he fired the head of the BLS. Those are real concerns we should be focusing on, and instead we've got these sort of self-inflicted wounds we've got to muddle through. So it's going to be contentious, it's going to be sparky, and I'm not sure I know how to predict how this is going to end by the end of this month.
Contentious and sparky. Congressman Casten, what's the low-hanging fruit here? What in the next 14 legislative days can the Democrats get through?
Well, I wish we didn't have to frame this as Democrats versus Republicans, right? Because the question is, should the government continue to do things? Should people be able to go to national parks and enjoy them? Should people sign a contract and know that the courts will be open to honor the terms of that contract? Should all the things that we expect government to do? And because there has been such a radical approach to the executive branch under the Trump administration, it has become incumbent on Democrats to say, okay, who will defend the rule of law? Who will defend the Constitution? And if we are in the minority and we don't have the gavels in the House or the Senate to control agenda, our ability to push that is limited. We have our public pulpit. We can go on television shows like this and work it through. But it is hard as long as we have a majority that is more committed to sort of bowing down before Donald Trump than standing up for their constituents. It's going to be difficult.
Understood, Congressman, but couldn't Democrats actually find some gains in the throes of negotiations, if only when it came to Obamacare subsidies being extended beyond the end of this year? Is there anything that would actually move lawmakers like yourself to a yes?
Well, so there are certainly conversations along those lines, and look, generally speaking, if we say let's just agree to fund the government at current levels until the next the next period, give us time to negotiate, that's the normal course. We do that too often, frankly. I think the challenge that a lot of us have, and I'm not saying that I'm a yes or a no on this. I think we'll see how it evolves. But the challenge that a lot of us have is, if Congress agrees to this and the White House doesn't abide by what we agree to, will we go back and hold them to account? And if we can't get a consensus, if we can't get an agreement, then we're left saying, well, do you trust Dr. Oz and RFK Jr. to honor those subsidies. And that degree of trust is pretty low. And it's, this is a town that depends on trust. And when the trust is weak, the negotiations are much harder.
If we do get to a shutdown, Congressman, some Democrats have said here on this program that it would not be wise to take that course unless there was a plan to reopen. We talked to Mick Mulvaney about that on the early edition of Balance of Power today. He said Donald Trump and Russ Vought would love nothing more than to shut down the government so they can decide where their dollars go and see how long they can outlast you. Do you worry about shutting things down with no plan to reopen?
Well, I understand why we are going to have a political conversation about the shutdown, but I wish we could talk about it not in a political sense. If you're a family who depends on cancer research at the NIH to fund your experimental trials, and that trial isn't going right now because no one's taking the phone, government is effectively already shut down for you. If you're a farmer who depends on weather forecasts and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they have fired people who collectively represent 15,000 years of experience. So if you're a farmer who depends on that expertise, that agency is effectively shut down already. And we need to make sure that those agencies work for the people who need them. And if we're only viewing this through the lens of, can I get away with this and look good and make my opponent look bad, then we aren't worthy of this office. We need to make sure that government works. We need to make sure it does the things that it has to work. And the question is not, will we shut down government on September 30th? It's, how do we make sure that we don't shut it down any further than it's already shut down? And how do we make sure that those agencies that have been illegally shut down can get back to full strength and do their job? And is it even possible to do that prior to 2028? That's the conversation we should be having. And I think if we had an honest conversation with the Republicans about that issue, I think you could find a lot of area of common ground. But they've got to be willing to stand up to Trump for that to happen.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for coming back to see us. Democratic Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois, we thank you. For more on the potential government shutdown when our political panel joins, stay with us up ahead. But first, some of the stories that we're watching in today's Power Brief. Afghanistan is still suffering aftershocks after a rising death toll after a massive 6.0 magnitude earthquake struck Sunday night. Flattened villages, rough terrain are hampering rescue attempts, with Taliban authorities airdropping dozens of commandos to evacuate the injured from areas where helicopters cannot land. As of today, the death toll has surpassed 1,400, with more than 3,000 people injured.
And 9 former leaders from the CDC have spoken out against Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., saying in an open letter published in the New York Times that his tenure has been, quote, unacceptable and, quote, unlike anything our country has ever experienced. The 9 medical professionals criticized steps such as restricting vaccines, pulling research funding, and firing thousands of healthcare workers. That they warned these new policies could put children at risk of serious disease and potentially lead to another pandemic if left unchallenged.
And the mayors of Minnesota's largest cities were on Capitol Hill today meeting with lawmakers calling for gun reform in the wake of last week's school shooting in Minneapolis left 2 children killed, about 20 people injured. Mayor Jacob Fry of Minneapolis speaking before the cameras earlier, demanding action from the nation's congressional leaders. Here's part of what he said.
There are so many heroes that have stepped up, from police officers to faculty, from teachers to church members, and they are heroes. It is now time for elected officials to step up as well.
We'll keep tabs on this story for you. And coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to get back into shutdown politics with Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York, and geopolitics, the meeting of Kim Jong-Un, Vladimir Putin, President Xi before the world. We have a lot to unpack after this long weekend. Stay with us. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're not going to find ourselves in a situation where Republicans at the 11th hour present a partisan spending bill that hurts everyday Americans, hurts children, hurts veterans, hurts seniors, and hurts the very people who this government should be helping, And then Republicans expect that we are just going to fall in line like they do all the time to Donald Trump's extreme agenda. That's not happening.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. That was Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries saying he was against a clean continuing resolution in place of a full funding package just 14 days before a potential government shutdown. Joining us now on this and more is Republican Congresswoman of New York, Nicole Malliotakis. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time. We certainly appreciate it. We were just listening to a soundbite there from Leader Hakeem Jeffries saying that the Democrats are not giving the votes. Can your party do it then?
Well, no, we need 60 votes in the Senate. That's the bottom line. And so you need to have Democrats that cross and in a responsible way do what's right for the country, avoid a shutdown. And what's interesting about Hakeem Jeffries' comments is that a clean continuing resolution would actually be a clean continuation of the budget that was put forward with President Joe Biden, his president. And so it's interesting to see now him saying that this is not a good funding mechanism and that it would be a bad way to avoid this shutdown. The reality is that we would have difficulty putting forward individual appropriation bills without the Democrat support, and that's because of the Senate requirement for 60 votes. And we know that there are a slew of Republicans, unfortunately, who will not support any type of continuing resolution. So continuing resolutions in the past have always passed with bipartisan support, and he knows that.
So here we find ourselves staring at a potential deadline, if there is a continuing resolution, that I presume would bump up against the holidays. Congresswoman, is that what it will take to get everyone on the same page? And is there anything Republicans will offer your Democratic colleagues, including, as we keep hearing, an extension to Obamacare subsidies? Would that bring everyone to the table?
Well, certainly the Democrats do have leverage in this situation. And let's see what they ask for and what they try to get for their constituencies. I'm happy to support things that will benefit all Americans if we can come to some type of resolution. I actually think some of the health insurance premiums and subsidies are important to avoid skyrocketing costs for individuals who do rely on this program, but we have to make sure it's done in a responsible manner. That is certainly something that could be potentially on the table as one of the negotiating tools. But for them to come in right now and say that they're not going to support a continuing resolution at all, which is what we're hearing today, is very disappointing. And for a long time, as a member of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, I've always worked in good faith with my Democrat colleagues to try to avoid situations like this, whether it be a debt default or a government shutdown. And we expect the same to be done when Republicans are now in control and do need to have those 7 Democrat senators to cross over and work with us, as well as members in the House. We do need the Democrats to work with us. And it always seems to come down to a vote where you see the more moderate members from both the Democrat and Republican side vote to put something like this over the finish line, and then the extremes and the fringes of both parties always vote against it. So, look, we need cooler heads to prevail here. We need to work in a bipartisan manner. We need to be responsible. We need to avoid a government shutdown. We need to keep these agencies fully funded. And we'll see what happens. But, today, let me just say one last thing. Today, President Donald Trump said he was doing a rescission here of $5 billion for foreign aid. And the Democrats are all up in arms, insisting that he must spend that money by the end of the month because Congress appropriated it. I mean, that's ridiculous when you hear that they're forcing him to spend money that we don't necessarily need to spend. He's looking for savings. In this case, that $5 billion could certainly go elsewhere to benefit the American people. And they're saying, no, he has to spend it because we put it in an appropriation bill. I don't agree with that. I think if we can find savings and you don't need to spend the money, then save it. And let's use it for something better that could benefit people here at home.
Congresswoman, let's talk about your constituents and whether they agree with that take. You're a Republican in a bright blue state. Talk to us a little bit about whether those rescission packages are something that would endanger potentially your reelection effort down the line.
I think it really depends on, it's on a case-by-case basis. There are certainly a whole slew of funding items that my constituents think is wasteful spending. They've written to me asking me to support the president on these rescissions. Then there's other things that they may want to see us continuing to fund, particularly some of the healthcare type programs, some of the cancer research programs, the global HIV programs, which is something that I fought to get back into the final rescission package that we passed before we left for break. These are all things that are incredibly, on a case-by-case basis. And, that's why I always said whenever we did these types of exercises and when DOJ did these exercises, we needed to be aware of unintended consequences. There were some cases where they cut certain types of funding where I had to go and fight and get that funding restored, and we successfully did. For example, World Trade Center healthcare employees that had been inadvertently fired, we got them rehired, very important to my constituents. Women's health research. This was an ongoing study that is critical and has actually saved money in the long run with some of the things that they've been able to determine through this research. We were able to get that money restored. So again, it has to be done in a very balanced way where it's thoughtful, right? And that's what I've been advocating for all along.
Does the redistricting spiral that we're beginning to see around the country weigh on Republicans in blue states like yourself, Congresswoman? And I mentioned that knowing that New York could be one of them. Governor Kathy Hochul has suggested that she would consider this. It looks like California's all in. How much of this becomes a problem when you talk to your neighbors in New York as a Republican?
Look, political gerrymandering is wrong, regardless of which party has done it. I've been very consistent in that opinion, and I will say that we beat Kathy Hochul twice. She's tried to do this already in 2022 and again in 2024, and we defeated their attempts to gerrymander. Now it looks like they may put up a political referendum on the ballot, or public referendum on the ballot, asking the voters to decide whether they want to support independent redistricting or a political gerrymandering. Of course, they're going to phrase it in a way that may sound nice, but my constituents, and I believe all of New Yorkers, know what they're trying to do here. They already previously rejected this by public referendum, and I'm sure they will do it again if it does come to the ballot one more time. And, obviously, we went to court. We won in court, and that is why my district maintained relatively the same. But that is more importantly why we got independently drawn and fair maps all across the state of New York. Maps that were competitive, by the way. Some of them went Republican that year in 2022, but then they swung back Democrat in 2024. That's what happens when you have independently, fairly drawn maps. The seats are competitive, and people have to go out and earn voters' support. And so I think that's really important. We should try to do that all around the country to give voters more of a say. It should not be an incumbent protection program. It should be competitive seats so people are held accountable by the people that they represent.
It's good to have you back, Congresswoman. Nicole Malliotakis of New York, we thank you, as always, for the conversation. As we turn overseas now, after North Korea's Kim Jong-Un arrived in China, as he joins President Xi and other world leaders for a massive military parade in Tiananmen Square set for tomorrow. And it's just a day after President Xi was seen shaking hands and laughing with Vladimir Putin. India's Prime Minister Modi, the visuals resonating around the world as China broadcasts this show of force against the West. Joining us now for more, Anja Manuel, Executive Director of the Aspen Strategy Group. It's great to have you, Anja, here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Would this collection of world leaders have happened if it were not their attempt to create an answer for what we're seeing with Donald Trump? We were asking last week about whether the administration was pushing India into the arms of Beijing. Do we now have an answer?
Yeah, very happy to be with you. Thanks for having me on. The optics here are not good, especially Modi shaking hands with both President Xi and President Putin of Russia. But I think there is less substance here than meets the eye. So while the optics are bad and the dust-up between the U.S. and India is real, and a lot of rebuilding needs to happen in that relationship, ultimately, China and India in particular do not have that many overlapping strategic interests. The border clashes that started in 2020 on the high Himalayan border aren't really resolved. India has a persistent trade deficit with China, even though it's their largest goods trading partner. There are more things that push India and the United States together than that push India and China together.
Anja, talk to us a little bit about the economics of all of this. We know the United States has been, for a very long time, trying to be a key supplier of defense to India, a country that has quite often turned to Russia for some of that equipment, some of that machinery. What changes the dial there? I mean, we know Donald Trump has tried to do that via trade negotiations and trade deals with various countries around the world. What is the sticking point with India?
Yeah, it's a really good point. There's two big sticking points between the U.S. and India, and they are resolvable. One is the United States wants, and India also wants, to get closer and closer to the West, to the Quad, which is the pairing between the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, to Europe and the U.S. on the defense side. Traditionally, the U.S. has not been comfortable selling India its most advanced weapon systems. And the Indian military for decades has been very reliant on Russian material. Now, slowly, over administrations, we've been weaning the Indians away from the Russians, but those processes are slow. So that's one. Two, you mentioned trade. India has always been a very protectionist country. And I think part of the dust-up you saw between the U.S. and India is a perception on the U.S. side that India wasn't making enough concessions on the trade side, and then some anger by the U.S. that India is still buying a lot of discounted Russian oil. They are. I do think they need to slowly wean themselves away from that. The Indians make the argument, of course, that they need to do what's best for their people. Russian oil is cheap, and by the way, the Chinese and Turks are also buying Russian oil, and they're not in these sanctions. My prediction would be that this is going to be very complicated for another couple of weeks or so, because for Modi's domestic political constituency, this fight between the U.S. and India was real, but ultimately that these two great powers will patch it up.
We spent time considering the optics of what took place yesterday. Almost a full hour inside Vladimir Putin's private limousine sat the Prime Minister of India after so much was made of the 5 minutes that Vladimir Putin spent with Donald Trump in the Beast, the presidential limousine. How much of this was theater? How much of this was choreographed for you and I to be talking about it right now versus something worth paying attention to? Because I'm assuming Donald Trump saw this took place.
Yeah, I think the answer is mostly choreographed, mostly optics, for the reasons that you and I have just talking about, Joe. India has a long-standing and positive relationship with Russia, as it had with the Soviet Union before, but ultimately it is moving increasingly into the Western orbit, and we should want to do everything, the U.S. and Europe, to make sure that that trend continues.
All right, Anja Manuel, Executive Director of the Aspen Strategy Group, we thank you so much for your time walking us through the geopolitics and the ripple effects around the world. Coming up, President Trump says, quote, "We're going in." When asked about deploying the National Guard to Chicago, we'll discuss with our panel what, if anything, can the Democratic governor of Illinois do about it. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
I would love to have Governor Pritzker call me. I'd gain respect for him and say, we do have a problem, and we'd love you to send in the troops, because you know what? The people, they have to be protected. We're going to do it anyway. We have the right to do it because I have an obligation to protect this country.
I'm aware that the President of the United States likes to go on television and beg me to call and ask him for troops. I find this extraordinarily strange, as Chicago does not want troops on our streets. I also have experience asking the President for assistance, just to have the rug pulled out from underneath me when execution meets reality.
The president may be hinting at the potential of sending the National Guard to Chicago, but we want to play for you some of what Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say in response. And we just heard that, excuse me. Stick with us, though. This is a conversation we're going to have on the Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm Kriti Gupta alongside Joe Matthew in Washington. As we were just saying, President Trump and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker speaking a short time ago, discussing the potential of a National Guard being deployed to Chicago. Let's discuss that story a little bit more and bring in our political panel tonight. Megan Hayes, former special assistant to former President Joe Biden, and Lester Munson, principal at International BGR Government Affairs, LLC. Megan, I'm going to start with you here. Just give us your initial take on what you heard in this back and forth.
I mean, I think that it's actually not constitutional to send to militarize the troops and to federalize these troops. It's an act of power and control here that he's doing. I think that Governor Pritzker is doing everything he can to push back. I think the government this is an immigration play and a power play. And I think that if we all just realized that and they were honest about it, we would not be having this back and forth that we were having.
You're from Chicago, Lester. Great
yes,
to see
I am.
you, by the way.
Thank
and
you.
I know that Chicago it means a lot to you on a personal level. So you're going to give me a straight take on this. I asked Sean Casten if the governor should call President Trump's bluff and call in the National Guard. He was a decided no on that. How about you?
I think it's a good idea. Chicago has a terrible crime problem. For a big city, it has a very high murder rate.
Do you feel safe when you go home?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And I'm a pretty big guy, and I normally don't worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And in Chicago, I'm more wary than I am in Washington, D.C. So I think this issue, it may end up being fought out in the courts if things proceed, but this issue politically is fantastic for the president. And one of the things that I'm watching is as he goes around and picks venues in the country, whether it's California, D.C., or Illinois, I kind of think he's test driving potential opponents for J.D. Vance for 2028. And I think he might be looking for the weakest candidate to pick a fight with, because that's going to inspire Democrats to support that candidate and make it easier for Trump's successor to win in 2028. That's how electric this political issue is.
Let's, piece by piece. Let's start with the troop movement specifically. Is that effective? People are saying that this isn't an effective strategy at the end of the day.
Totally fair question. And if it's not effective, don't do it. But what we've seen in D.C. in the last few weeks is that there has been a downturn in crime. Mayor Bowser, no Republican at all, she's a Democrat, has come out and said she's in favor of what the Trump administration is doing in D.C. We've seen in particular, carjacking numbers go way down. I think to this day, there's been no murders since the federal troops have deployed in D.C. So if it works, if it's sustainable over the long term, take a look at it. Why wouldn't the governor call and have a safer Chicago? Why wouldn't Mayor Johnson in Chicago be in favor of more safety for his residents? If it's just for political reasons, shame on that.
So you think Donald Trump's trying to smoke out J.D. Vance's opponent in 2028? Is he talking to the right people?
No, and it's overwhelmingly bad in polling that people do not want the National Guard on their streets.
But isn't that kind of true? Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker, who else would he be going after?
Sure, but people overwhelmingly do not want the National Guard. It is polling terribly with independents. And guess what? The election is going to be decided again in 3 states with a bunch of independent voters and these swing voters. So who are you playing to? That's great that your base can get energized by this, but the American people writ large do not want this. And it works in D.C. because of home rule. In a state, the governor and the mayor have a very different role than it does in D.C.
Critics of that argument would say, though, that mayors, cities, congressmen have had plenty of chance to address these problems and haven't. There is no other choice but for the federal troops to get involved. What do you say to that? Sure.
Chicago is number 27 on the most dangerous cities list. What about the other 26 cities? Most of them are Republican. So how about we invest, instead of sending troops, why don't we use that money to invest in these communities, invest in more policing, invest in more community programs? I am not one of these people that think that there isn't crime. I've lived in D.C. for 20 years. There is crime here. But what is the long-standing approach? So when the National Guard leaves D.C. and they're no longer running around the streets of D.C. and picking up trash, because that's what they put out that they were doing, and people now feel safer, what happens then? The crime will go back up. There's still no investment in more policing, and there's no investment in more community programs. So that's great that he's going to go send people in for how long? How is that a long-term plan? It's not. We need to have actual solutions here.
Well, let's embrace that idea for a moment as well, because, Lester, I presume that you would support sending troops or federal law enforcement into cities in red states. If you look at that list, Memphis is way ahead of Chicago. We've heard about Mississippi and some other areas that could actually use help. Wouldn't it kind of end this conversation if the president went there?
Sure, do it, especially if it works. And again, I think I'm not saying this isn't political. In fact, I'm explicitly saying it is political, the places he's selecting as places for troops to go and provide this and to kind of bring forth this law enforcement issue where there is a big difference between the two parties. Definitely political. Nevertheless, does it work? Is it sustainable? Can you do this in a way that makes sense over the long term? All totally fair questions. But we shouldn't have a political response immediately just because people don't like Donald Trump. Crime is terrible in Chicago. It's terrible in Memphis. It's terrible in Washington, D.C. If we can provide a solution to it, let's go ahead and do that.
I just don't think the solution is to put military on our streets and normalize having military on our streets. I think that there are different solutions that we can come up with. I agree with you that the crime is bad, but there are other solutions besides militarizing our streets and making it normal to see military walking along our streets doing the policing work.
Do you delineate, as some do in the polling that we've seen, between the National Guard and federal law enforcement, say sending in the DEA or DHS as opposed to having military troops wearing uniforms carrying guns?
There is a huge difference, but most of the federal law enforcement that are there to do immigration and ICE raids. So that is very different than walking the streets so there's no murders or carjackings. That's a very different thing to do. So that's why I'm saying if that is your purpose, then be honest that that is your purpose and go forth with that.
Well, when you consider posse comitatus, this came out in a court ruling today that found the president, in fact, acted illegally in sending troops into L.A. Should that guide him in the future here?
Yeah, I think he's got to honor what the courts say, but I think it's fair to go back and try it a different way. I take the point that maybe you don't want MRAPs and tanks on the streets and guys in fatigues. So let's use federal law enforcement officers. Can Governor Pritzker talk to President Trump and say, hey, I'd like you to do it this certain way, and I think it might be more sustainable this way? Let's have that real conversation instead of everyone kind of, going to their corners for a boxing match.
But if he wanted to have that real conversation, he would have reached out to Governor Pritzker rather than putting a plan in place. And I think that's the problem here. And I understand that the president wants Pritzker to call and beg for it, and Pritzker's sort of like, why are you coming here? So I understand that these two men are going to have an ego problem. Like, I totally get that. But if the federal government is useful here, they should actually be useful to the states and call first and figure out a real plan, because there are actual people here who are suffering.
Do you think that the court's role in this, even just saying that the move into L.A., for example, was illegal, is that an effective strategy if it only applies to California?
But I don't know what the strategy is. That's just our law, and Trump needs to abide by the law. If he's going to break the rule of law, that's a different political polling problem that he's going to have moving forward.
But can he, even if he does break the law and then the court ruling comes in months after the fact, does it matter that the court's even ruling on this in terms of the actual effective strategy on the ground?
I think it does, because I think it's laying the groundwork now, right? The court ruling today is laying the groundwork for these other states that most likely a federal court will find it to be unconstitutional in other states. So I think that I don't think that's a democratic strategy, though. I think that is just what our rule of law and our Constitution is.
There's another test when the voters get to go to the polls, right? We're going to have elections here this November in a few places in New York. We're going to have elections at the state level and at the federal level next year. People can vote on this. And if Megan, as Megan says, it's not politically popular. I disagree, by the way. But if she's right and it's not politically popular, the voters will turn out the people who favor this, and people will react accordingly. So I think it's fair that all three branches of our government are involved in this decision here.
Yeah. The president says Chicago's next. We don't know when, but we'll be talking about it with Megan Hayes and Lester Munson. Thank you both for a smart conversation and for being part of our program this evening. Lot to follow up on here. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find it on the terminal and online following the president's announcement earlier today and ahead of what's going to come this week. We thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.